Yeah. No. Yeah.
There is one. Um, when we talked about the local reentry programs, I believe the number was stated as 14, but it's actually 10. And the four main ones that we talked about who have really robust programs, Prince George's, Howard, Anne Arundel, and Montgomery are the four we're focusing on. But there's 10 all total throughout the state that have signed MOUs.
Thank you so much, Chair Hatch, and thank you for the invitation to speak with this task force. Good morning. As the chairman mentioned, my unit produces the department's Recidivism Report, which I believe you all maybe have reviewed in prior years. I'm here to walk through elements of the analysis, just really getting into the definition of recidivism and provide some insights from the latest report, which covers fiscal year 2021, which has yet to be fully submitted, but I think would be germane to your considerations for this session. So I'm going to just put the presentation up. You will receive copies of this at the end, so please no need to focus on particular elements on the screen. You'll have hard copies at the end. All right, can everybody see that? Great, thank you. Apologies, we're a Google enterprise at the state, so Zoom is a little new to me. So first, I'd like to just frame out the historical trends that impact our calculation of recidivism over time. Here you'll see that over the past 10 years, the intakes to state correction have fallen significantly. You'll see a large impact by the COVID-19 pandemic in fiscal year 2020 and 2021. Although those intakes have rebounded, they have not exceeded pre-COVID levels. This is a good thing, right? For those of us who believe that lower incarceration is the right fit for the state. And certainly we have remained kind of abreast of those trends, but we do not expect to see them yet increasing beyond what we saw before COVID. Even before COVID, Maryland has had one of the largest 10-year decreases in the state incarcerated population, initiated initially just by slow reductions in what offenses yielded incarceration, so the shifting to citation offenses, the shifting to lower sentences, the largest impact being after the 2015 Justice Reinvestment Act, which saw significant and targeted decreases in state incarceration, specifically for individuals who were serving sentences for nonviolent offenses, namely theft and drug possession. So we saw a really big change in the composition of our population after that. And I note this for you all because fewer releases, though we tend to follow a 2-year lag, fewer intakes yield fewer releases. So what we are measuring over time as we're recreating this recidivism measure is a measure over a much smaller population than we've historically taken a look at. And the composition of that population has changed as well. I mentioned the diversion from nonviolent offenses, not resulting in a prison sentence. That means that over the past 7 years, the department has seen a shift in the demographic of its population. And by demographic, I'm speaking specifically to the chief offense. So the primary leading offense that dictates the length of the incarceration is increasingly, for 86% of our population now, a crime against another person. Now that includes the 14101 crimes of violence in Maryland, but it also includes lesser crimes that are not crimes of violence, but nevertheless directly reflect an offense against another person, whether that's an assault, even if it doesn't rise to the level of a violent offense. And what that indicates, although that's just the current incarcerating offense and doesn't speak to the entirety of an individual's criminal history, what that means is we are seeing longer offenses, which you'll see on the next slide. We're also seeing a drastic increase in the average length of stay. If you imagine that denominator, we have fewer individuals and longer stays related to more intense offenses that are currently being served for. And what that means is that we're working with potentially a different population. On the good side, it means longer time to engage that individual in programming prior to release. But the difficulty that carries is individuals who've been separated from the community for longer, individuals who potentially have more lengthy criminal histories, and have that stand as a barrier to reentry due to the collateral consequences of incarceration. So you'll see, for those of you who maybe have been working in criminal justice and recidivism in Maryland for quite some time, we used to have, the department had recidivism reports every year until about 2015. And then what happened was we had a major investment in a new data system, and that disrupted the entire data environment in which that recidivism was calculated. So we took that opportunity once we had 3 years of stable data again in 2016. Or rather in 2019, so it was implemented in 2016. Recidivism has to age, much like a fine wine, in order to be accurate. And so Maryland is actually pretty quick with its turnaround within a 4-year fiscal year period. So what we did when we took a look at that change was not only how to recreate it from the ground up, but also what we wanted to improve as far as accuracy. We had seen differences in performance of certain measures. Our previous method did not involve tracking by a unique identifier. It involved a matching protocol that had a lot of sources of error. And I say that only to indicate, while this is an accurate representation of the recidivism data that's been provided to the Department of Budget and Management and to the legislature, I would heavily counsel anyone taking a look at our recidivism reports since 2019 to resist the temptation to compare it to prior recidivism. They operate on different definitions. They operate on different methodology. And of course, we are talking about a drastically different legal environment. So 2016 was the first year that the JRA revisions went into effect. That's really our baseline measure. And we have until 2019, when the COVID pandemic had its major impact on our operations, to see the impact of that. And our 2021 is the first cohort that's really starting to come out on the other side of COVID, when those court closures would have caused delays in adjudication that had initial impacts, really drastically decreasing recidivism within the first few years. And many other states during this period have either chosen to not publish recidivism measures or recommend a more longitudinal analysis, which I'll discuss in our future steps at the end of this presentation. So let's get into what we mean when we say recidivism. From the state, speaking from the perspective of the State Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, DPSCS measures state responsible recidivism. That means recidivism where the individual comes back to a touch point that the department has. So we're starting with individuals who are released in a given year. So when we say the recidivism rate for 2019, we're talking about everyone released in the fiscal year of 2019. Not individuals released prior. We're talking about individuals who came back. I'll actually do the next slide. We're talking about individuals who have come back to state incarceration. They've been sentenced for a new offense. They've returned to state custody from mandatory supervision or parole for a violation related to a new offense. They've returned to state custody for any period of time for a technical violation, or they have had a new offense for probation. So the way to think about this is we're measuring offenses as a public safety measure, and we're measuring return to custody as an impact measure, because we understand the tremendous disruption of taking someone out of their life and taking them back into custody. And for those individuals, it's important to acknowledge the impact that that continued interaction with the justice system has on their outcomes over time. The hierarchy that you see here, offense above return for a new offense, return above technical violation, and technical violation above a new sentence of probation that is not associated with incarceration. That's the hierarchy that we use in attributing the recidivism reason. So recidivism has this hierarchy. So for example, if somebody had a new probation offense and they came back perhaps unrelated for a new offense that resulted in incarceration, we would count which happened first. And then where we have multiple, we would count the most severe. So that's how we err on the side of maybe having the most accurate representation of what's happening within this group. So to overlap, recidivism is a measure that someone released has come back to prison. It is a measure of reoffense and technical revocations. So that means if someone came back just for a technical revocation within the first year and had no reoffenses, we would not, they would be within the recidivism cohort, but it doesn't necessarily mean that someone has committed a new criminal offense. And it counts the soonest return to prison, not necessarily all returns to prison, because they're encompassed within that soonest measure. Recidivism in Maryland is not arrest. This was a major change that we made when we changed the methodology. And it is one that a number of other states are also emulating, acknowledging that the threshold for arrest is not the threshold for being found convicted of a crime. And being arrested is not something that indicates that someone is not necessarily following all laws of probation. So we only count indicators of an offense that are fully adjudicated. We do not count local jail sentence because we do not have that information. That's maintained by the county detention centers. Recidivism is not always reoffense. Think of this as a measure of re-engagement with the justice system and not necessarily a measure of success of individuals. And I think that's something that we'll get to later, is that we are really talking about different things. It's not every event post-release, it is the soonest event. And it's only events within the first 3 years. The department does not yet have a longitudinal recidivism analysis. The Bureau of Justice Statistics, for example, does some measures over 10 years because we just restarted in 2016. We're working within the data that we have currently. So let's get into trends. For fiscal year 2021, which is the latest released, let's talk about, now that we understand what that recidivism means, 67.85% of individuals who left in fiscal year 2021 did not come back to the state for any reason. And we now know that those reasons are encompassing, right? They include a new probation offense, even if they did not re-enter prison. They include a technical revocation of 15, 30 to 45 days, even if there was no other offense. So most individuals do not come back to DPSCS custody in 3 years, which is when they're most likely to come back. 11.44% of individuals came back under the department's touch point, but not necessarily to incarceration for a new probation offense. 12% came back to the department's custody for a new offense, and 8.7% came back for technical revocations. And that's a huge success point for the department, as JRI specifically reworked some of those probation matrices and responses to try and reduce the driver of technical revocations as a return to incarceration. And that's a trend that over 30 states have moved towards as well, to really limit reincarceration for when it is perhaps most appropriate. So you'll see over from 2016 onward how these stack up. Your first year after release, as I'm sure this task force is well aware, is when someone is most likely to come back to custody. That's the most tumultuous time, that reentry period. And the further out from that initial release, the less likely someone is to come back. So when we take a look at our cumulative 3-year for 2016, that's our really good baseline. That's 37% of individuals coming back under department custody or care in any way. You'll see the green shaded areas are where you start to see the COVID-19 pandemic impact operations. And you'll see that especially in that really high drop in first year recidivism, because that's when most individuals come back. And that's been met by a shifting, right, of like perhaps more individuals coming back in the second year. But as you'll note from the reasons, not necessarily for different reasons. So delaying that return to custody, not fundamentally changing the conditions of it. And we still see about 5 to 6% in the third year. So while we have increased in recidivism over the past cohort year, I want to draw your attention to the 32.15% compared to the pre-COVID amount, which was 37. So even though we've had kind of an increase in return maybe to normal from the COVID period, we're still 5 points lower than we were prior to COVID. So in Maryland, this is still, to the extent that recidivism is a measure of public safety, it's still a positive indicator of change for public safety. But what we've taken a look at over the past few years is looking for success in different ways within this recidivism information, because success is not just not coming back to prison. It's also not coming back to prison so soon. So we are staying consistently near the national average, but time to recidivism is increasing, meaning longer initial periods of stability in the community. And most importantly, what we look at from a state policy level is the changes post-JRA. Whenever you make a major change, especially around criminal justice reform, there's always going to be kind of eyes on those outcomes to ensure that it's not yielded a negative impact to public safety, a negative impact to recidivism. And that is not what we have seen. We have seen that the long-term impacts of that have resulted in safely diverting individuals away from state custody. And even when individuals come back, they're having more time, 6 months or more on average in the first year before they have any interaction coming back into contact with the department. So when we talk about who is impacted most by recidivism, the current rates of recidivism, we're really looking at that emerging adult population, 18 to 26 years old. They are in many ways the drivers of recidivism. This is taking a look at all reasons. This is not just new offense or technical revocation. But I think this is germane to some policy decisions as well for individuals who are of a geriatric age, which for prison measures only is for 55 and up. We see the lowest rates of recidivism. Again, for any reason. So this is an indication of different outcomes based on different subgroups who may have different needs. And it can help drive conversations around if criminal justice reforms were taken further, which groups perhaps could most safely benefit from expanded return to the community. And that would be that population 55 and over. And that's a consistent trend. While we did see a brief increase in 2018, that has leveled out since then. Again, a slight increase in 2021, but we know that 2019 and 2020 were really kind of aberrant years. So future measures. Many other states who are revisiting how they calculate recidivism are shifting to what are called desistance measures. Understanding that how we define success is not the same thing as measuring who is incarcerated. There are a number of ways in which individuals who are justice involved are successful in the community, even when they do come back to DPSCS custody. And that includes taking a look at measures like how long they're in the community before they come back, what their employment outcomes are in the community, and what their educational attainment is both behind the wall and continuing education once they return to the community. DPSCS is working with MDH as well as some other state agencies to better leverage our data systems with one another to understand the outcomes of the various programs that we are all targeting towards this population. And we'll really looking forward to especially our work with MDH with this 1115 healthcare waiver expansion to identify how increased access to healthcare services, specifically mental health and substance use coverage, will help and potentially have an impact that's discernible within the recidivism rates. So having individuals who leave prison that are potentially more connected to services is still a measure of success from a reentry perspective. And in partnership with the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention Policy or programs, apologies, they've changed a couple of times, taking a look at federal research opportunities to maybe close that gap for the largest jurisdictions on local recidivism so the state can have a full look at that And that's an effort led by the Maryland Data Analysis Center, housed within GOCPP. Our future recidivism analysis priorities include specialization and 5-year recidivism. 5-year getting just a longer period of time, a more accurate measure, and specialization speaking to that desistance. That's what some of our colleagues in Pennsylvania have taken a look at, which is that if someone comes in for a violent crime and they do reoffend, but for a crime that does not maybe have a victim, a crime that is not a person-based crime, perhaps a crime that's born out of a needs. So for example, just a proper low-level property offense, that still demonstrates success. That demonstrates a change in the underlying, perhaps, behaviors, addressing of underlying criminogenic needs, and that's nonetheless a public safety measure that's independent from recidivism. But more than anything, what has driven the changes in how we present this data and how we measure this data has been feedback from policymakers, legislators, the public, and other agencies. So I welcome not only your questions now, but going forward as you review our reports and as you embark upon your work to identify what information Maryland needs to improve its service to incarcerated individuals. We are happy in future years to take a look at slicing this up in different ways that answer the questions that you have. So I hope I stayed more or less on time, Chair Hatch.
No, you're fine. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Guarino. I would ask now, are there any questions that the task force may have at this time for the Assistant Secretary before we move to the next item on the agenda? And I see Mr. Wilson's hand.
Good morning, and thank you for such an extensive presentation. I had to step away from my computer for a second, so I have 2 quick questions. One, if somebody recidivates for probation, is there a particular reason why that would be considered recidivation if they're already under a current charge?
So let me make sure I understand your question correctly so that I'm answering it. What we're talking about in this instance is initiation of a new probation sentence for a charge that is unrelated to the charge that they were incarcerated for. So for example, when someone receives a split sentence and they end their period of incarceration, maybe with a brief period of mandatory supervision, and then initiate part of their suspended sentence, that would not be counted here.
Okay, and my second question, you may have answered this and I apologize. So in Baltimore City, we have central booking, which is run by the state. Is recidivism counted once they get new state time, or is it counted once they are arrested at that point?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. We do break out the Baltimore City population differently because we account for when individuals have those short-term local detention equivalent sentences that they're being released from. We still do not define recidivism by arrest at any point in time. So arrest or commitment to pretrial detention is not recidivism because from the department standpoint, individuals are innocent until they're proven guilty. And we refuse to count that. That's really more of a values determination on behalf of the department. We do not count that as recidivism until a final adjudication with a guilty finding is made. So we do break out that short timer population differently, but for that group, we have not done a full soup to nuts local detention, state recidivism, continued cohort. That's certainly an element that we've taken a look at growing into in the future.
Thank you.
Ms. Briley?
I do.
Good morning. So I have a couple questions that may not even be able to be answered in this moment, but just something for the group, I guess, to think about. So I'm understanding that this is just for individuals that have been remanded down to state custody.
Correct.
So this does not include individuals on a local level that are serving longer than a year. Because I know for a fact that Anne Arundel County have individuals that are that stay at the local level because the Office of the Public Defender have had their sentencing structured that way, that they stay at a local level longer than a year instead of sending them to the DOC. So that would not be included in your recidivism data, correct?
That's correct, because they're not in our data system, they're not in our custody, we don't have access to their records.
Okay. Only reason why I'm going down this line of questioning because I am actually a proponent of the locals, of the local jurisdictions doing their own recidivism study. So that's why I'm going down this line of questioning. So also, do you all okay? So what about individuals who have served, they never served a state sentence, they served a federal sentence, but then they incur a a charge, whereas though now they're remanded to 20 years in state sentencing. So do you all capture that as recidivism? Because their initial involvement in the criminal justice system was on the federal level. They never did any type of state time, but now they have incurred state time and they're doing 20 years. And these are real live examples that I'm giving you. So would that be calculated in your recidivism because their initial charge was not in the state system?
So thank you for that question. Recidivism is prospective, not retrospective. So when we're talking about the recidivism rate, we're talking about people who are released in a particular year, and we're only looking forward. So if they had a previous offense, it doesn't matter if it was on the local level, the state level, or the federal level. That's not what recidivism measures. It only measures their outcomes after the period of incarceration that the department had an impact on. So if I take your example and I switch it around, an individual was released from a state sentence after 20 years. They committed a new offense that was adjudicated on the federal level and not the state level, right? So state first, federal second, we would not have that information because that's in the federal BOP database.
So I'm just asking also because when you're looking at recidivism, it's not, that's just my perspective. I'm not speaking for anybody else. I'm just saying from me, from a criminal justice professional, that it's about involvement in the criminal justice system, period. You know, for me, and especially for a reentry perspective. So that's why I was just going down that line of question. But I'm just taking notes because once again, I'm just an advocate for the locals and you know, for all the state have you all measure the way that you measure. The locals should have a mechanism where they can capture their data because it matters. And then the feds as well, you know, and because I work with individuals that are also on the federal level, all these scenarios that I mentioned, I have examples of these individuals. So that's it. But thank you so much for your answer.
My pleasure. It's great to see you again, Ms. Briley. I will say, you know, I wholeheartedly agree. Local, and there's ample evidence of this from the Bureau of Justice Statistics and our national partners who do have the ability to do those interstate comparisons and those federal and state longitudinal, maybe 10 and 15-year measures. So that's where we would look for that information, not Maryland specific. But the trends on the local level are so different from the trends on the state level. So that, oh, absolutely. Thank you. Let me stop that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Cobb, this will be the last question that we take, and then we're going to move to the next item.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was a lot to take in. Two quick questions. Are you able to break the data down to show different recidivism rates depending on the length of sentence? Question one. Question two, is there any way to gather data from the people who are on supervision as to actually how well they're doing? Are they engaged? Are they in school? Are they working? Are they in a good housing situation? As opposed to just knowing whether they've committed, you know, an offense that would land them back in prison.
So it's two questions. I'm going to answer them in order. Yes, we do break it down based on duration of sentence. That's a standard measure that's in our report. So you'll see that in our 2020 report from last year, as well as our fiscal year 2021 report, which will be coming out later this month. To your second question, which was again regarding desistance measures. All of those community engagement measures are exactly those that other states are starting to look at as well. And so that's part of what we're trying to look at with the data sharing from partner agencies. Are they engaged with a local community behavioral health clinic? Access to services, engagement in treatments that may be referred by individuals, for individuals who are under supervision, may be referred by their agent, or it may be a direct handoff from the individuals providing reentry services. Because we are talking about two different populations, individuals leaving incarceration, which have, I think, inarguably a much higher need versus the entirety of the parole and probation population, which is 40,000 individuals in the community every year. They're two separate groups. So I would recommend, and what other states do as well, is they separate out outcome measures for those two groups because they have potentially very different experiences and very different needs. So I would say, yes, we absolutely are planning on taking a look at community engagement and other assistance measures for the release cohort, because what we're trying to hone in on is specifically those individuals whose reentry period the department had an impact and ability to touch. So that's why we take only a look at who's being released now and maybe not what the outcomes were of a release that they had 10 years ago when they're coming before.
Super helpful. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really appreciate it.
Assistant Secretary, thank you so much again for coming. If the task force should have follow-up questions, we'll be sure to get those to you. This presentation was most helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for the work that you all do.
Thanks.
The next item on the agenda is the chair's comment. Today, our focus is on providing the subcommittees the opportunity to meet and discuss the draft version of work plans that have been produced by the subcommittee chairs. I will stress again that this is just a draft. It's a starting point. I'm hoping that everyone had an opportunity to sit and think about what are some of the things they would like to see reflected in these draft work plans. Each draft work plan will be presented to the task force in February. So this is the reason why we're providing the time today to, one, go over each work plan as a subcommittee, and then two, to discuss how often the subcommittee will be meeting. Whether you are a member of the subcommittee or not, we're asking that you submit your feedback, your comments, your suggestions to the chair, and later on I will provide a link so that you can submit those comments on a Google form, and those comments will be provided to the subcommittee chairs. The next item on the agenda is the task force timeline. During our last meeting, Delegate Taylor raised the question of whether we had sufficient time to produce this finalized reports in December of 2025. The executive committee met, we discussed where we were at, and we believe that it's in the best interest of the task force to play better safe than sorry. That is to ask for more time. So should we need it, we'll have it there to take. If not, that's great. But before we actually submit the request to the delegate, we wanted to get the feedback from the entire task force on how they felt about us asking the delegate to put in for more time for us to produce the report. And I want to open up the floor to get the feedback from the task force. Is everybody okay with it? Or is there some objections to requesting her to file for more time should we actually need it? Okay, I see some hands. Mr. Wilson.
That's my day today, man. I guess the question is legislatively for the delegate, is this an easy task for her, or is this something that's going to require a lot of work on her part?
Okay, I caution to speak for people, but I can tell you based off of our prior conversation, she does not believe that this will be a heavy lift for her. And she also, and I thought I saw her actually in.
I'm here.
Okay, there we go.
Actually, I went on ahead and put the bill in for it. Now, depending on what you guys decide to do today, I can withdraw it or it can stay in the hopper. I'm waiting to hear from you guys, but it's done pretty much.
Christian Gant.
Oh, well, Brian was before me.
Oh, well, thanks, Christian. I was just going to say, I think more time is a good idea. When I initially responded to the form, I had said that I wasn't sure. But after reading the work plans, I think that brought home for me just kind of how much there is to research and to do. And so I do think more time makes sense.
Okay. Christian Gant.
Yeah, sorry, I missed it. What is the kind of current contemplated timeline and what is the kind of proposed? I didn't quite catch that, sorry.
Right now, the report's due December, the end of December 2025. Delegate Taylor, can you speak to what what your recommendations would be so far as the extension is concerned?
Sure. I put in our extension through October of 2026.
Okay.
Okay.
And we said October as opposed to the 31st of December, knowing that there's elections, there's a lot going on during that time, and it would be great if we finished our work before election day.
Okay. I will just say from the MEJC experience, right, all this depends on how, right, deep and intricate you're going to make the report, right? What kind of citations, references, all that. I definitely think it's a good idea. I don't think the initial year was realistic, or it's like, you're gonna have less recommendations. I will say also from my experience, something I kind of wrote down and thought about. I know that I don't think this is funded, but I would just say at MEJC, we had a consultant that helped us write it, and we wouldn't have gotten anywhere close to where we were if we didn't have somebody helping us with that stuff. So if this is gonna be all volunteer, just maybe make sure your ambitions match that.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Gant. Ms. Cobb, I'm going to go in the order of the screen. Ms. Cobb, and followed by Ms. Briley.
Oh, I see Renard Brooks up ahead of me.
I'm using my screen, Ms. Cobb.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. I just want to say that as a member of the group that discussed this, the goal really is to work as efficiently as we can. It's not really to spread the effort out, but we wanted to have the safety net of the extra time. That's it.
Ms. Briley, you're on mute.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm actually, of course, I'm not totally in favor of an extension. And this is why. Is because one, I'm still trying to understand the work plan. The work plan, like I'm gonna take an example. I'm just using an example, like defining the gaps. We do not, I don't feel like this group needs to put energy into something that has already been done. So I think just as far as managing time, we just need to gather that information, because so many organizations, so many agencies, we know what the problems are. I know I personally been at this since 2005. I can't speak for nobody else on the call, but we know what the problems are. It's about addressing the solutions. So maybe even, and this is just me, us thinking about the work, because I also think that we need to rework what the work groups look like. But I definitely don't think that we should be defining the problem again. The second thing is that we, as a state, everybody knows this, the delegate can speak to this, we cannot do, we're not supposed to do any unfunded mandates. Am I correct? Right? We're not supposed to, we're not supposed, well, I know we do it, but we're not supposed to have unfunded mandates. So, those are the kind of discussions that I think that this task force needs to be having when we're talking about making recommendations and just putting our energies into certain things. And I just personally think that can be done in a short amount of time. And then again, to even piggyback on what delegates said about elections and things like that, I just think that we just need to make sure that we are watching, how things are going, and just making sure that our efforts would not be for naught. It may be better for us to get done sooner so we can get things done versus extending this out, and then the face of the legislator change, and some other things change, and then all this will be for naught. So that's just my opinion. I mean,
Thank you.
But that's all.
Thank you, Ms. Briley. And I would just, one thing that I will want to say again is that in respects to the work plan, it's things like that that is important to communicate and put in that form so that we can get that feedback, because these work plans by no way are they finalized. It's something that we have to discuss. We're going to continue to have this conversation when we break out here in the next, hopefully 10 minutes, so we can start actually formulating the work plan. Mr. Brooks.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm in favor of what the delegate has already done. Propose a bill for an extension. Just because we have an extension doesn't mean we need to use the whole extension if we find that we finish sooner. I believe it would be advantageous for us to have a little more time, especially if we need it, because one group is going to be more in depth than another group. As Ms. Briley mentioned, gaps have been identified over and over again, but that's not the whole ball of wax that we have to contend with. So that's my opinion. The bill should stay in as she has proposed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bright?
I actually was going to say what the secretary said, but I'll confirm it. It's not our intention to drag this out. So we will still be working expeditiously and setting our timelines as if it is due December. We're not gonna set them as if we have until October. We just wanted to have that option. I just want to make sure everybody understood that.
Mr. Gant?
Just piggyback up the last two. Yeah, I definitely think we should timeline ourselves, right, much more disciplined and shorter than our time, because it is going to take more time than we think. But I do think that'd be wise.
All right. Chair is willing to entertain a motion for us to accept what the delegate has done and extend the timeline according to the bill that she's already put in.
I'll make a motion to support in the motion to support the delegate's bill.
Is there a
Second.
A second by Mr. Wilson? All those in favor, please raise your virtual hand. Okay, make sure I have everybody. Everyone in favor, raise your virtual hand. And just keep them up as long as you can so my screen can record it. All right. If everybody could put your virtual hand down. Just hit the same button to lower it. Yep. Dr. Andrews, could you put your hand down, please?
Mm-hmm.
All right. All those opposed, please raise your virtual hand. I'm not seeing anyone opposed. Anyone abstaining? Please raise your virtual hand. All right, so the ayes have it. Delegate Taylor, thank you very much for putting that in, getting it ahead of the ball game with that. And with that, I'm going to move to the next item on the agenda. So everyone received the subcommittee assignments. I did miss one person. I've actually fixed that. I tried my best to stick to the groups that you all, your first choice of the subcommittee that you pick. If not, definitely your second choice. The exception that it's going to be for today, with the report compilation and strategic recommendation subcommittee, I think it's only going to be 3 people in that breakout room, just because everyone else is going to be in another subcommittee. However, the secretary, Ms. Cobb, she's going to make sure that she shares notes. I'm asking everyone to make sure that you share your notes from your subcommittee with me, so it can actually be baked in the minutes and also so that each member of the task force can get a copy of it. Everyone received a copy of a blank work plan, and the purpose of that sheet was so that you could kind of go down the line and, put your thoughts into this. Again, I've said this, I think 3 times. I'll say it a 4th time because it's very important. What was provided to the group is just a draft. And so these next 30 minutes or so, we're going to go into a breakout room and we're going to discuss, the proposed draft version of the work plan. And we're going to do a lot of editing, a lot of tweaking. Between now and our meeting in February, members of the task force are encouraged to actually fill out a recommendation form. And I am going to actually share that right now in the chat. And I will follow up with an email at the end of this meeting today to make sure that you have the link to this because it's important. Again, Ms. Briley, she made a point, that we have, a lot of stuff already out there to identify gaps. That's just an example of something that you will put on this recommendation form. So it could be passed to the subcommittee chair. So please utilize it. We're going to now move to our breakout. I want to cover one thing that's very important again, and that is please identify who's going to be the subcommittee vice chair. That's important. And I need that person's name today, preferably in an email. And please assign someone to take detailed notes because Zoom will not allow you to record when you go into breakout rooms. So that's going to be important. For our viewers that are watching by stream, it's important for you to note that you're not going to be able to see every breakout room. You'll only be able to see the breakout room that my screen is on. So again, we're going to have these notes. We're going to have the minutes. Anyone can request a copy of them. We'd be more than happy to share them. And if the public has any feedback that they would like to get to the task force, please feel free to reach out. And we will make sure that you have the public participation form so that you can fill that information out and that feedback in there and we can get it to the task force. So I'm going to do something I've never done before. And I'm going to put us in a breakout room. I might need Ms. Martin to walk me through this. So I'm going to open all rooms, right? And broadcast. Right?
How long do we have, Joshua, to do this?
You're gonna have until I'll give you to 12:25. Really, I want you.
All right, and then
time.
Okay, and then you'll bring us all back together at the end.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right. Okay. Hey, Angela. Let's see, participants. Okay. Broadcast. No, that's not it. All right, everybody.
We're sitting tight. Don't worry. Take your time.
Let's see, breakout rooms.
You should just have to hit open all breakout rooms.
Okay. Yep. Got it. No, that's not right. Okay, wait a minute. All of these are unassigned. Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, that didn't work.
It's
There
back.
he is. All right.
That did not work. So wait a minute.
So when you click on breakout rooms, do you have an option to open all did you pre-assign the rooms?
I did.
Yeah, so if you hit click on breakout rooms on your tab, and then there should be an option to open all breakout rooms.